So good to have you all here. This is a very special day for us at College Autism Network because about 5 years ago, this month, we started a little thing called the College Autism Network Virtual Association of Scholars Canvas, not to be confused with the learning management system that uses the same name. But we like going for good names and good acronyms. And what started as an opportunity where basically we at CAN just curated the names of a lot of people publishing research on autism in higher ed, threw them on a listserv and hope they would maybe be interested in gathering together or exchanging resources. And it's blossomed over that period to include more than 600 of you from all parts of the world, sharing your experiences and perspectives, collaborating, learning from others, starting research studies, gathering participants, celebrating milestones, and this is one of them for us. And we're really excited today to have 4 of our Canvas mainstays and presenters and folks who have been active in our community to serve as our panelists to talk about the state of the field of autism and post-secondary education from a variety of different lenses and roles as well. We'll get to that in just a moment, but as we do with all of our Canvas meetings, we're going to start with an icebreaker activity. And because this is a celebration, we do not have cake that we can deliver to all of you. I'm afraid our resources are a little bit limited on that front, but we do want to ask everybody what is your favorite treat to celebrate an occasion? So it could be dessert or a snack. So we welcome hearing your thoughts on that. If you'd like to share those aloud, you're welcome to do that as well. What is your favorite snack or treat to celebrate an occasion or your occasion? So we have Theo loves chocolate brownie pie. Jess is in for wine. We have carrot cake, French silk pie. Lee's in for a margarita, peanut butter pie, takeout, champagne. Oh my gosh. See, now we know what to have at the College Autism Summit in terms of our food list, Lee. Stroop waffles, poppy seed cake, cheesecake, lots of cheesecake.
Right. What I have to ask one of our colleagues, what are stroop waffles? I don't know stroop waffles.
I feel like I've heard about stroop waffles, but I'm curious to hear what other a Dutch treat is what Laura says. Yes. Very nice. Oh, lots of good treats. So I'm sorry that we're starting the meeting with getting everybody hungry, but it is nice to know what works. Oh, that's a very good point, Matthew. Anything covered in chocolate that doesn't move. Yes, because we don't want the thing to still be alive. All right, thanks for indulging that. Just a reminder to everybody here at Canvas, we invite you to be part of our listserv if you're not already. We imagine many of you are, but if you haven't been on our listserv, that's the great mechanism to learn about our future meetings and get access to our recordings. We also want to create space if folks have resources that they'd like to share. I know in the chat, excuse me, I'm sorry, in the meeting minutes, meeting agenda, we have a reference to the CUNY Neurodiversity Conference. So I'm not sure if Kristen, you posted that or if one of your colleagues did, but it seems like we definitely want to create some space for that.
I think Matthew might have posted it. Did you post it, Matthew?
No, I did not.
Oh, cool. It's a mystery, but it's going to be really cool. It's focused on neurodiversity and art. So I highly recommend attending. We have a really cool lineup.
Wonderful. And I'll post it in the chat here in case folks don't see it or do not have the agenda up. So that's definitely worth checking out. And also want to mention too, because I briefly skipped over it, Lee, College Autism Summit, October 18th through 20th. Anything to share on that front, Lee?
Just that we will be having a more robust poster session to highlight research this year than we've done in the past. And so we're pretty excited about that. And then one other feature that we're going to have this year that we're very excited about is an enhanced undergraduate student participation initiative, really trying to generate more interest at the undergraduate level, particularly students interested in doing advocacy and networking opportunities. Helen is one of the two people coordinating that, but if you've got undergraduate students that you think might be interested, keep an eye out for our launch of the summit promotional stuff, which will go out in the next couple of weeks. Our registration and call for proposals opens on April 1st.
All right, thank you, Lee. Brad, I'm going to turn it over to you. You briefly mentioned pieces in the agenda.
So two quick things I wanted to say. One is thank you. I know that I probably should say this for the end, but in case people cut out at the end, I want to give a huge shout out to Brett. Brett has been coordinating these meetings for several years in a row now, and having worked with him in many capacities, I can't tell you how lucky you all are to have him in this role. The number of people that he has brought together, and truly we have over the years brought several hundreds of people from across the world together to hear each other's research, and none of that would be possible without the coordination, leadership, and guidance of Brett. So just want to give a big public shout out to Brett. Thank you for this 5th year anniversary is made possible by you, so thank you. The second thing to note is the Pieces Project, of which Brett is a co-PI, and Kristen is here as well, is also part of that team. I think that's it at this particular meeting. But you all know that we've been working very hard to get this Pieces Project going, in part because we want to ensure that it can contribute to the field in terms of providing access to data for a wide range of scholars, not just those who are kind of locally involved in collecting it. Collecting the data. And thank you to you all, though we had anticipated getting no more than like 250 people. We got 430. So we are working with a database of over 400 people who are autistic college students that over time we will be able to make that data available to everyone in the field. But largely that is thanks to you all helping us get the word out, and a huge thank you to you all. So a lot of thank yous today. Appreciate it. We'll get you more info on the Pieces Project as we get further along.
Thank you, Brad. That was very kind. I promise I didn't pay him to say any of that. It's very sweet. Yes, we have a recent doctor in the house per the agenda.
That's me. I'm sorry, I didn't put my name. So yay. So I defended my dissertation last Tuesday. I actually passed with distinction, which is fancy, I guess. I don't know, but that's very exciting. And I pitched a number of things in August that got picked up. So I'll be presenting I'm presenting 3 different things. I'm presenting at NASPA about belonging. I'm presenting at AERA a paper about how autistic students evaluate relevance as they are persisting. And I'm working on a book chapter about culturally relevant academic advising for autistic college students. So I've got a bunch of things kind of in the works. So thank you for your support along the way. So
Congratulations, Carolyn. That's awesome.
thanks.
Thanks for sharing that. Any other celebrations that people want to relay? Or news? All right. Well, feel free to drop those in the chat. At this point, we're going to shift it over to our panelists who you see spotlighted on screen here. Just really glad to have them all here. And let me kind of reintroduce you all to our fine 4 folks here today. We have folks whose engagement in the autism community is significant, exists across a variety of different spaces and geographic locations, and whose perspectives have really added to our body of literature, our appreciation of autistic college students' experiences, both in college, but also into the workforce as well, and following their long-term outcomes as well. So we have 4 folks who have served as our Canvas presenters in the past, and people who have been very engaged in Canvas in a variety of, and can in a variety of different ways. So These folks have a lot of great perspectives to add. So we have Dr. Kristen Gillespie-Lynch, Associate Professor at College of Staten Island, Dr. Jonathan Vincent, lecturer at Lancaster University, Dr. Theo Bakker, Professor at the Hay University of Applied Science and researcher at, oh, Theo, I got it earlier.
Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam.
Fantastic. See, I can't do that justice. And Helen Rottier, doctoral student at University of Chicago at Illinois. Apologies if I messed anything up, folks, but so glad to have you all here. Going to ask that each of you provide just a quick introduction of who you are. So if you can share your name, pronouns, institutional affiliation, your roles or titles, and just a brief, just 1 or 2 sentence description of what your research covers. From there, we're going to go through a set of different questions. Some are for all of you, some are for you individually, some are for whoever wants to jump in. And then we're going to allocate the last 15 minutes roughly for questions from everybody joining in today. So please feel free to start inputting those questions and comments and reflections in the chat, and we can draw from that as well. Helen, can we start with you, please?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Helen Rottier and my pronouns are she, her. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and my work is focusing on the experiences of belonging, community, and culture of autistic and more broadly disabled students in post-secondary education. But also looking at disabled disepistemologies and how knowledge production is constructed for people with disabilities, especially what Remy Yergo calls rhetorical disabilities, so like autism.
Thank you, Helen. Theo?
Yes, I put it in the chats. My name is Theo Bakker, pronouns are he, him. I'm professor at the Learning Analytics at the Hague University of Applied Sciences in The Hague, and assistant professor at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. In The Hague, I focus on inclusion, analytics, and fairness in AI in higher education. And in Amsterdam, my focus is on neurodiverse students in higher education in the Netherlands.
Wonderful. Kristen, please.
I'm really honored to be here and to see this moment. This community has really transformed my work and I think all of our work. So I'm Kristen Gillespie-Lynch. I'm an associate professor at the College of Staten Island and the Graduate Center. I run a participatory mentorship program for autistic college students at CSI called Project Reach. And I do a lot of work, primarily participatory at this point, which I'm very happy about, focused on reducing stigma and increasing the employment, focusing on helping autistic students develop positive employment outcomes and succeed in college.
Thanks, Kristen. Jonathan, last but not least.
Thank you. So my name is Jonathan Vincent and my pronouns are he, him. I'm Irish, but I live in England. I'm based at Lancaster University, but I live in York. My research has been around the experiences of autistic students moving into university and college, their experiences of it. And my emphasis for the last number of years really has been about the transitions out of higher education or college and into employment. So it's me.
Wonderful. I have to commend everybody already in being very succinct with their introductions. That doesn't happen all the time, so I appreciate that. So we can create even more space for addressing the many questions that that are on my mind, that are on probably a lot of folks' minds. And we're going to start with this first question, ask that everybody also try to be pretty succinct with this answer too, just because we want to get all 4 of you to contribute to this. Most importantly, you all are emerging or established or folks in this space, this landscape of autism and higher education. What led you to engage in this as an area of inquiry? So maybe we'll kind of do this in reverse. Jonathan, could we start with you?
Okay, sure. I guess I come at this from having worked in schools. I was a high school teacher for a number of years, and I worked in specialist provision and mainstream. And part of my role was teaching, but also putting in place some of the kind of specialist provision for autistic students. Then in 2012, I moved into higher education, and I was a disability practitioner, and I set up the provision in the University of York for autistic students. I'm working with them to kind of decide what they wanted and how it would work. So we established an early start program and a social group and some of the employment provision as well. And happily that's still on the go. And then since then, working with them, that really kind of stirred my interest. And actually one of my favorite papers, which I didn't share, is a participatory paper from 2017, which is about them as co-authors talking about their experience. So that's kind of really where it started. And actually just very recently, my 6-year-old son, I've been researching for about 10 years. My 6-year-old son was just diagnosed as autistic before Christmas. And I think that has sort of motivated me even more so now to kind of think about the future for him. So yeah, that's where I've come from and where I'm going.
Appreciate you sharing, Jonathan. Kristen, how about you? What was your path?
I have a lot of family members on the spectrum, and I started out as a caregiver for autistic kids who didn't speak and who are now adults. And then I went to get my PhD, and while I was at UCLA, I worked in a pathway program for autistic students and students with intellectual disabilities who are attending courses to help them get jobs. And I did a study with Stephen Kapp about the neurodiversity movement and supports that autistic people wanted. And so when I came to CUNY also in 2012, they were looking for people to apply for funding to develop supports for the growing population of autistic college students. And so I applied, and then we started Project Reach then. So I was very lucky to end up in an institution that was ahead of the curve and realizing that we needed to support students. And also I learned that I was in the school within CUNY that had the largest number of autistic students throughout CUNY, which was very fortuitous as well.
Yeah, fortuitous is definitely the right word there. That's one of my favorite words, actually. Theo, what was your journey?
Yeah, I had been studying student success for many years using data analytics. And then by coincidence, I met Sander Begeer, and through him, I realized it was really special that I had all this data available. And I started studying it. And my main interest is in understanding the key difference between autistic students and their peers, and not only differences, but also similarities, because I saw many of them. And through my studies, I've been always looking into what are the more specific differences when you look at the data. That's how I got to study this topic. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Theo. And Helen, how about you?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with autism when I was a sophomore and junior in undergrad. That's like when the diagnostic process happened for me. And I was already on the path to being very excited about psychology research and some other things. I actually applied to grad school to study social emotional learning and gender in autistic children, but through some lucky opportunities, I was, put into positions where I could do work on higher education. And I'm really indebted to one of my mentors, Dr. Morten and Gernsbacher, who has helped kind of shape me into this path, which I love so much.
Great. No, thank you all for sharing. So we have an understanding of your paths to studying this, but now we're also interested in, well, your entry points were all at different points in your career and different times over the past decade, roughly. What was your understanding of the landscape of autism in higher education scholarship when you first began engaging in research related to this? This is for anybody who wants to contribute to this.
When I started studying it, one of the first studies I read was that one of Gelbar about the amount. I think Brett, you wrote on it yourself. To me, it was quite new that there was so little data available, and also that studies from Europe were very scarce. So that's, for me, was quite a reason to get into it. And now 5 years later, I see a huge difference between that time, and now that's really wonderful. So that's that was to me the most new thing when I started with it. Yeah.
Yeah, please just jump in if whoever wants to share.
So the field was very siloed when we started, which I think is why this network has been so important. So all the studies were generally conducted at one institution with just a few people, and the people weren't very representative of the autistic population, which is still an issue. And then there was, from the very beginning, there were inklings of like a strengths-based approach, but they were mixed up in confusing ways where there would be deficit-oriented things about autistic people dropping out more that weren't really supported. And so the early field, I think, was very confused. And partially it was because things were happening on such a small scale and we couldn't get a big picture of how autistic students' experiences were situated within the broader landscape.
I look back in my USB file to see kind of 10 years ago what I was reading, and I was just struck by two things. I would agree there was basically very, very little and it was quite sort of disparate. But one of the things that really made an impact on me was a book called Aquamarine Blue 5, Personal Stories of College Students and Autism, back from 2002. But it really changed the way I thought about what I wanted to do and what was important. So I think whilst the field is growing, I think there's been a real strong history of excellent research, which is based on people's experiences and co-authoring and participatory approaches. So,
yeah, I want to echo and connect to what has been shared, that, you know, the work I'm doing and the work I'm starting to do is really trying to connect what we know from these single institution, single program evaluations, and look at what models exist and how those models are being implemented in different ways. So that's what my dissertation is about in the peer mentoring space, and I'm really excited to do that work. But I also think, you know, like Kristen said, there was so much confusion over how do we do this in a strength-based way? How do we do this while acknowledging the challenges? And that's a consideration in disability studies more broadly. Of, you know, early on, we went like hard social model. People with disabilities have strengths. That's obviously very true, but kind of minimizing or ignoring those challenges. And we're also in the disability studies space starting to see the pendulum swing, and hopefully to include more college autism in disability studies.
Yes, many snaps to that. We're going to shift to some questions that are more directed to those of you individually, but if others still want to contribute, you're welcome to do that. Helen, this question's for you. What is it like for you to be a self-advocate engaging in this line of work?
Yeah, being a self-advocate in this work is thrilling and frustrating and very rewarding. So I'm constantly grateful for the work I get to do, for the networks that I'm building in the communities and community members that I get to interact with. I'm really grateful to be on this panel with people that, you know, I cite in my work, and that I'm really excited whenever I see you have new things come out. And I was really honored when Brett asked me to be part of this. It can be frustrating because of misconceptions that still exist, but especially that existed within the last 5 years. And I think we're seeing a positive change towards more participatory work, more incorporation of autistic perspectives, more acknowledgement of autistic people as experts on their lived experience. And that's really key. And I just love working with students and seeing them succeed and being someone that they can connect with and feel comfortable with. So in addition to my research, which is my true passion, I'm finding that I enjoy direct work with students much more than I ever expected to.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think it often comes back to the individual student and kind of influencing one's vision of what the world is through that specific lenses. Jonathan, a question for you. What is the current state of work and scholarship on autism and employment? You're obviously one of the key voices in this space. So what are you seeing here?
So I was having a think about this earlier on, and I thought I would probably, obviously it's a broad field in terms of autism and employment. So I thought I'll try and limit myself just to speaking about within relation to kind of university students. And that's an area that I've been really, really interested in. You know, I guess people are familiar with the fact that the employment outcomes generally are pretty poor for autistic adults, and there's quite a lot of really good work. You know, David Nicholas and Darren Headley, Melissa Scott, Julie Lawrence-Taylor, lots of people doing really fantastic work in that space, and we've got lots and a really growing body of research around autistic students' experiences of university, and college. But I think there's this gap in terms of what happens next, and that when I was thinking about what I wanted to focus on for my PhD, that was it. I was working with students and realizing we're getting them into university and we're supporting them into university, but we're assuming that once they get a degree, they'll be fine and get a job, and that really wasn't the case. And so over the last number of years, I've been really trying to gather more evidence, more data, both qualitative and more recently quantitative, to understand a bit more about those gaps. And I'm just in the process of making adjustments and edits to a paper which is under review, and that's looked at data in the UK across 6 years in terms of students' graduate outcomes, and trying to get a sense of what are the trends in relation to autistic students by comparison to non-disabled students and by comparison to other disabled students who aren't autistic, to be able to see what's happening, where are they going. We've got a data set which is about 1.3 million different responses. So there's a lot of people involved, and we're seeing what we thought we would see, unfortunately. We're seeing 5 times more likely to be unemployed compared to non-disabled peers. Only 34 in full-time employment, 34% rather in full-time employment. And those outcomes are poorer, which is, I think, disappointing in lots of ways, but is also helping us to make a case for universities to put in place better provision, to think more strategically and more long-term about the kinds of supports that can be in place. At the same time, I think there's lots of really interesting work which is helping us think about the kinds of provisions and supports which really do work, and those kind of participatory approaches, I think, are going to be absolutely central to that. And Kristen's work and others is, I think, really important. So in terms of the field, unfortunately, there's not really a lot. We don't know much. And it's a bit of a gap at the minute, and I would highly encourage and welcome other people to be involved in that. And I know Theo's work has sort of been looking at the outcomes for students and graduates as well. So I think this is an area where we do need to shift our focus into what happens next. And I'd be keen to be involved in that.
No, thanks for that perspective, Jonathan. Going to just switch the order of the questions just slightly to build on what you were saying. So this question is directed to Theo, and then we'll shift to you, Kristen. Longitudinal work among autistic participants. Certainly, this is a familiar word among so many of you. And again, if others want to chime in as well, but what possibilities exist in terms of following folks' pathways over time?
Well, as you know, I studied a large data set of 25,000 students in Amsterdam for a period of 7 years. And for each student, I had 3 years of data. I had this research exemption to be able to use this data, because in the GDPR in Europe, for some data, you need consent, of course. But because it was quite data from students who already had finished their studies, I was able to study this total data set without consent. And this is really a very important issue, because this is the only way we can compare data between groups of students with autism and without them, and then you can can balance outcomes statistically to account for differences that are not there if you take into account backgrounds, characteristics like age or gender and earlier results. So, and then you come to other conclusions. So that's not only that it's longitudinal, but also that you can compare it and apply some statistical techniques. So that was quite important. And at the same time, at the moment, we're looking into just, like Jonathan said, national data. And hopefully we'll be able to see then what happens after the studies, which I don't know yet. Another thing is I only was able to look into 3 years of a bachelor program. And of course, many students take 4, maybe 5 years. So there are lots of areas I like to look into a little bit more. But it's again exciting if you will be able to get a permission to do the same research again, but then on a little bit more data. That's I'm now in the middle of it, of arranging this new research project. Yeah.
Always exciting when there's new ventures to be started. Kristen,
Yeah.
over to you. In what ways do you feel researchers can work more closely with autistic communities in the design process per participatory work?
So the key thing is to plan for a lot of time. Participatory approaches are slow. So we described our approach as participatory, which in a way that in retrospect, we weren't really participatory yet, because it took a lot of time for students to be able to step into those leadership roles and for students who were shyer to see students in those leadership roles and to imagine themselves there. So if you're starting from scratch, it's going to be a very long and slow process, but you don't always need to start from scratch. There's existing groups. There's the possibility of research that's more autistic led. So reaching out to groups that already exist or responding to inquiries from them. So there's different ways to get into that space. And then when you're in the space, it's one of the most beautiful forms of research, I think, but it's also very challenging. So there's a lot of concerns about power dynamics and tokenism, and there's a lot of work that has to go on with things that can be hard in academia, just with advanced planning, because you need to be able to communicate what the research process is like, where the opportunities to be involved are, how to be involved. So you need to do a lot of advanced communication and then a lot of work thinking about what's working and what's not working together and revising. So, and then we all need to share what we're doing. So the Aspire guidelines were hugely influential for us. So we basically adapted their guidelines directly to our approach. And then we've added some things along the way, like we found their process of decision-making to achieve consensus and to document consensus really, really, really important. And over time, we've added processes where we distribute the roles within our participatory group more. So like someone will be the timekeeper, someone will be the chat reader, because you always want to encourage people to be able to communicate in varied ways. We added a protector of the participatory approach role because the approach needs to be protected. And then even with all those safeguards, if you're collaborating across groups that have different theoretical perspectives, then you have to anticipate that there will be a lot of back and forth in terms of making sure that the participatory decisions are actually enacted. So a participatory approach is very difficult, but I think it's a really democratic approach to research, and it's a way to make research meaningful and to kind of avoid what Helen was mentioning about when the strengths-based approach becomes overlooking the challenges. So we want to take a true understanding of the neurodiversity movement where we recognize both the strengths and the challenges, and that the approach itself has strengths and challenges and needs to be very, very self-reflective and collaborative.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. Question for anyone here. What are the most important considerations when developing a new research project? If we can maybe have, at least one person chime in here, and there's a few other questions to pose to the rest of the team.
Yeah, I have a thought about this, and it's ask yourself, what do you hope comes out of this research? Not just like knowledge for the sake of knowledge, which can sometimes be important, but I think in the college autism space right now, we really need to keep focusing on how we support these students. So what comes out of this work? And is it something that autistic students or autistic adults care about and want? Or is it something that is gonna, kind of flop because there's not stakeholder buy-in? So I know we can all think of examples of research, not just in the college autism space, but across fields where, there's all of this work and all of this buildup to do something, and then it doesn't end up impacting the target population. So that's why I'm really excited about projects like Pieces and other work that's happening by members of Canvas that is really considering and thinking carefully about what are the outcomes that we're aiming for, and what do we want to learn, and what will we do with it?
I think I would build on that, and when I was thinking about this, I wrote down, ask ourselves, who is this for? And I think academia is a field, is a space where it's quite egocentric. It's about us. It's about publications and your name and your H index, or if you care about that. And I think you can get carried away with research. And I think it's important to stop and ask, who is this for? Because it's easy to get carried away making it about us. And just like Helen said, if it doesn't benefit that community that you're trying to kind of work with, then this is completely pointless. So I think we have to kind of just be mindful, I guess, of ourselves and what we're doing and why we're doing it. So.
And building on that, asking for input from the very beginning, ideally making your study participatory from the beginning, but saying, is this relevant? Does this matter? And being open to the possibility that some of your ideas won't matter. And it's better to move on then than to move on after you've written the whole paper.
Yeah. I would say the same. Hopefully I will be able to have more participation in my research because that was lacking in it so far. Because I'm using such a lot of data, it's really important to think beforehand what you're going to do, and make also a pre-registration of your thoughts. Otherwise, you'll be starting digging in data itself, and so that really helped me to focus on the topic and make research scalable, and also so the research design was really important to me. And I think it's similar, like you said, Kristen, in your field, that it takes a lot of time thinking about before you just start doing it. It's and of course, I already learned doing this research how I want to change it in the next sets with more talking about hypotheses or outcomes with students from the community. Yeah, that's for me really important. Yeah.
Great. I think in the interest of time, we're just going to focus on 2 remaining questions that I had shared with all of you in advance. If we can get some quick thoughts from the 4 of you, where have been your favorite places to publish your scholarship? And if there are journal editors on the call, don't be offended if they don't mention your journal, but any favorite places where you've published your work?
I love autism and autism in adulthood.
Me too. Yeah.
That was my 2 choices. Yeah.
And
I think
yeah,
to give a better clarity, I suppose it's the editorial ethos, I think, of both of those journals, and feeling really confident in terms of the type of peer review, I guess, that you'll get, but also what is driving the whole journal is, I think, really is fantastic, and is a real shift from where it was.
One final question for everybody. Where do you think the research should be headed over the next 5 years? Certainly the landscape has changed dramatically since Canvas came into the fold. But not saying that we've been responsible for that, but ultimately, the amount of scholarship that has been published in the past 5 years, the variety of pieces, the elevation of students' perspectives and strengths-based approaches, as you all have alluded to. What does the next 5 years look like? What should people here be contributing to in terms of their own work, perhaps? This is for anybody to jump in.
Well, of course, I hope more data-driven research as well. So I'm really excited that Jonathan started with this data set from the UK. I'm really interested in more insights from the labor market success and differences between regions. I think that it makes a lot of difference if, for instance, you are living in the Netherlands where universities are really close. You can live at home, or when you live in America or in the UK, and I think that makes a lot of impact in dynamics, and that would be interesting to have a more overview of that differences, and then we can understand sometimes the questions, for instance, in these meetings, because they of course come from our personal views, how we experience higher education in our country, and that would be benefit all of us. Yeah.
I guess I would echo Theo's points, and I've already said put a pitch out more research in the area of kind of what happens next. I think for me that is one of the big areas. Yeah.
I'm thinking about more diversity across identities in the field. This is an all-white panel, and we as researchers know why that's a problem. Thinking about more autistic voice in the ways that it is ramping up across the last 5 years, and how we can increase that even more. So more autistic PIs and more autistic folks kind of leading the charge in this space. And I think also really attending to and asking students what they want and what they need to know, which again has been ramping up in the last 5 years. And I think there's just more space to grow in that area.
And I totally agree with everything each of you have said. I really liked the CAN employment panel, but I thought it was sad when they talked about how they don't even a lot of employers don't even look at higher education. And so I think higher education is really struggling with helping people in general prepare for employment, and particularly neurodivergent people. So, and also the importance of a much more intersectional approach, much more representative of people around the world, much more participatory and autistic-led. And also a focus on building community and autistic identity, and recognizing how disempowering it can be to internalize the types of narratives that are present in our culture, and working together to help individuals, but also to change things structurally. So convincing administrators to do things differently, and not just focusing on the individuals.
All wonderful points and contributions, and I commend everybody for being very mindful of time and space and being able to cover a lot of ground in a very concentrated period. So thank you all for your attentiveness there. We're going to shift it over to questions from the audience. So folks, if you want to start putting some thoughts in the chat, or if you want to share those verbally, you're welcome to do so. We're going to start with a few that came in earlier. Lee says that the term neurodiverse has become increasingly broad in definition, with autism as just one group. Within that definition, other groups are decidedly different in many ways. How do researchers design research that is narrow enough to be statistically meaningful while still being inclusive? If anybody wants to chime in on that, and then we'll move to another question.
Yes, Lee knows that I have many thoughts about this and how we use language around neurodivergence and neurodiversity. But I would say that it's important to recognize how neurodivergence and neurodiversity were conceived as tools of inclusion. And that's a direct quote from the person who coined the term neurodivergent. To let in more people to identify and understand themselves better and find community. And on the research side, I think we just have to be transparent about what we are doing, what we are looking for, and if we're looking for those similarities or differences. I recently had a conversation with another scholar about this of some people are researching one specific population and being told they should broaden. Others are researching the full neurodivergent experience and being told they should be more specific. And so there's always tension in research of how we should do things. And my final thought on this is that many people have multiple diagnoses or multiple identities under the neurodiversity umbrella, and it's impossible to internally extract those and disentangle those. So I had a bipolar diagnosis before I was diagnosed with autism. Then I was diagnosed with autism and they took the bipolar diagnosis away because they thought, oh, this is explained by you being autistic. Then several years later, I was re-diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And so I can't tell what parts of me are because I have bipolar disorder and what parts of me are because I'm autistic. They're all just kind of mushed together in the neurodivergent self and brain that I have. And so for me, I think that like the inclusivity is really important for understanding whole people, even while being more specific can help us understand changes and be more statistically meaningful.
Thanks for your really rich and candid answer there, Helen. Jenna has a question, and then Jess, I see your hand is raised, so we'll turn it to you over, Jess, in just a moment. Jenna asks, what do you think about pipeline to employment programs for autistic students that teach specific skills? And do you have recommendations of specific researchers doing work in this area?
Kristen, you might want to respond to this as well.
Sure, I just realized that Jenna's the one who must have posted the CUNY Neurodiversity Conference. She's organizing it. She's the primary organizer.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Jenna.
Oh no, I was just saying yes, that was me.
I didn't realize you were here. I mean, I think such work is really important as long as it's approached from also recognizing that we need to change things in how people are hired. And so helping people develop skills is definitely something we should do, but a lot of the changes need to be in terms of accessibility in the hiring processes and broadening those tech initiatives out. And when thinking about the skills, doing that in a participatory way. So developing skills that autistic students really think would be helpful, and ideally having people at various stages in their career be part of that process so they can reflect through their own experiences on what would have helped them.
Yeah, I guess that would be my view as well in terms of everybody can develop skills. I don't think anybody is expert at interviews or any aspect of life, so we can all be developing skills, and that's not a problem. I just have an issue, I guess, if it's trying to force a neurodivergent person or an autistic person into neurotypical ways of being for no other reason than that's what they want. And I think we've got to put pressure on employers and industries to think differently, and not to think necessarily, and I have a problem equally with a kind of autism as a superpower and we should all see it in those terms, because I don't think that's helpful, and I think that puts pressure on people in very different ways, and sort of commodifies people in a way I don't like. But it's about changing the mindsets of employers to see what is possible to change, and it will have very little impact on you and will cost almost nothing, but will actually make your workplace so much better for not just that individual, but for almost everybody there. So there's lots of work to do, I think, with employers in that regard. And my view would be it'd be better to spend the time working with them than it would be to invest all that time in trying to upskill a person to try and fit a neurotypical way of being.
Great, thank you for those contributions, folks. Jess, you have a question, go right ahead.
Yeah, so my question is around funding for research studies. So I am an early career scholar, so a lot of times when I go to IES and NIH grants, they want heavy hitters on my proposals with me, and many times those people are not openly neurodivergent, and so I don't want them with me, to be just kind of blunt and honest. And so the struggle, so there's that piece of it, and kind of if you have any experiences or advice for kind of going after those larger grants. The other piece that's really difficult for me is I am in those beginning stages of really making sure the work I do is participatory, like in a meaningful way. And so for me, I don't want to go to IES or NIH and say, I'm doing this study and this is my design and these are my variables, because I want the students that I'm working with to do that. But I don't want the students working for free. So I don't want them to, so like I'm in this kind of like catch-22 where like I need the input of the students to make it important, but I don't want them working for free, and I don't have the money to pay them to do that right now. So I don't know if anybody had any advice or experiences, or maybe it's more of like a sorry, keep going kind of thing.
A positive is I think that the funding agencies are much more receptive to participatory work than ever before. Like if you read the early Aspire accounts of like being rejected for trying to do anything participatory, that was the norm maybe a decade ago. So like our NSF study, we didn't frame it as participatory because we didn't know if the NSF would be responsive to that. We had like some autistic leadership, but it wasn't explicitly participatory. And then when we got the funding, we made it participatory. And then we went to the NSF meeting and realized that they were actually focused on participatory work across a whole range of communities. That was a shift within that particular branch of the NSF, ASL. And I'm a reviewer of IES grants. And there's also much more responsiveness at the transition level there to participatory work. So I think the field is changing a lot in very positive directions, but it's hard.
Yeah, great question there, Jess. Well, I think we're a few minutes from wrapping up. Is there any final question? Otherwise, I'll throw a very quick question into the mix. Lots of great conversation today. Well, I'm going to just throw out one quick question for each of the panelists, and it's going to be a brief answer, but it's going to be one that I think engages in a lot of reflection. So my question for each of you is, what is one word you could use to describe your understanding of how the scholarship on autism in post-secondary education is changing? So how would you describe in one word the state of the field now? Maybe it could be a couple words, maybe it could be something hyphenated, but just a general word that you think captures where we are at this moment.
Blossoming.
Good word, Kristen.
Yeah, it was really nice. Also, I thought Helen noticed this, the destigmatizing. That's to me very important.
I was just thinking, gaining momentum.
Room to grow.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, nice. We didn't even plan on that. Those were really good. I just want to extend our thanks to each of you for not only being here today on this panel and extending your insights, but also just being titans in this space who are really guiding so many of us in how we think about our work and who we're citing and everything in between. So thank you, Jonathan, Theo, Kristen, Helen, for your contributions. So yeah, I hope everybody passes along their thanks. And I see other words are coming in the chat. Maturing is a word, impactful. Lots of words to describe where we are at this point in time. I want to remind everybody here that Canvas continues as we enter, I guess, our 6th year in a sense of operating. We have more more monthly webinars that will be very exciting, including next month. We have Dr. Kathy Shecky from Wayne State University, who recently defended their dissertation. Presentation next month, Friday, April 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern time, is Autism, Adulthood, and Employment Challenges. Oh, wow, these are like all things that we've been talking about, the double empathy problem and perceptions of an autistic employee in the workplace. So we're really going to look forward to that. And then we'll wrap up the spring with our colleagues from George Mason University talking about higher education accommodations. So many thanks to all of you for being part of our community as we continue to blossom, to use Kristen's word, and we're maturing and we're growing, and we're hopefully contributing to destigmatization among all the other important roles in our work. So glad to have you all here. By the way, I never introduced myself. I'm Brett Nachman. I've been with you for the past 5 years, and hopefully we'll be with you for the next 5. Great to be with you all, and we'll see you next month. Have a good one.